Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to another edition of An Hour with Bob. This is an afternoon edition, special afternoon edition. In 27 years, I've never done a show this early in the day, and I did this as a special because it's a special guy I'm dealing with, a guy I have the utmost respect for, and he's done some great things. He's an author. He's a historian laureate of Rhode Island. He's written several books, and you're going to hear from a very interesting guy. His name is Dr. Pat Conley. How you doing, Doc?
Bob, I'm great, and I appreciate the afternoon. As you know, I doze off around 6 or 7 o'clock, so for accommodating me, I'm greatly appreciative.
Well, what are you, 68 years old? How old?
82 and climbing.
82 years old.
Yes.
God bless you. 82?
If I knew I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself.
Really?
Yes.
Well, you look pretty damn good for 82 years old. Come on.
It's my wife feeds me well.
Gail, huh?
Yes, Gail, my wife Gail.
Yeah? And how long you been married?
We've been married 39 years,
She doesn't
4
look
months
39
and
years
3
old.
days.
Wait a minute.
Yes,
How does
yeah.
that happen?
Well, I don't know. She's well preserved, let's put it that
I
way.
guess so.
Yeah.
My God.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So how you doing? How you feeling, first of all?
Well, mostly with my hands, but also well. I'm still practicing law.
That's amazing to
Yeah,
me.
still doing real estate.
Yep.
In fact,
You do
just
real
sold-
estate law,
Yep,
right?
just sold a house on Newport Avenue, only a quarter of a mile from where we're sitting. So I'm active still in real estate, and I'm working on a couple of books as well.
Wow. And then you're involved in 3 organizations that I know of, right?
Yes.
What do they call that? What do you
We
call
call it Cleo's
that?
Trio.
Cleo's Trio.
Because they're historical organizations.
Right.
And Cleo is the Greek muse of history. So
Okay.
a little rhyme, so to speak.
I wonder who had that. Who brought that into play?
That was what I did to describe them there.
Yeah.
One is the Rhode Island Publication Society.
Right.
That's was started in 1974 when I was the chairman of RI 76, the Bicentennial of Independence.
Wow.
And then
And the
Rhode Island,
Heritage,
pardon?
the Heritage Foundation?
Well, the next one that was created, in fact, even the earliest, was the Rhode Island Heritage Hall of Fame.
Right.
I was inducted there in 1995 and joined the board in 96 and became president in 2003. And like Vladimir Putin, I don't want to give up the position, so I'm still the president of the Hall of Fame.
Oh, do you get elected to that?
Yeah, I get elected. Yeah, it's a little lobbying here and there does it. And then finally, the Heritage Harbor Foundation,
Right.
which was created in 2015 out of the proceeds from the Heritage Harbor Museum sale. That was supposed to be a big state museum on
Right.
the waterfront.
Right.
And the Great Recession and a very unwise move by the state in cutting historic tax credits drove out the developer, Strever Brothers, that had done the Royal Mills in West Warwick, that had done the locomotive works, and they would have done this, but the combination of the recession and a very stupid move by the incumbent Governor Kacheri doomed it. And so they brought me in as president to try to work out some arrangement with a future developer.
Right.
And by 2014, we did. The developer came in, Commonwealth from Boston, and they wanted to put a state nursing school in the building. So we were able to get $4.5 million for our interest in the building, which I then deposited with the Rhode Island Foundation. And so we now have a
little kitty. You have a little kitty.
Yeah, I have a multi-million-dollar foundation that supports various historical projects throughout the state.
Right.
With the Rhode Island Foundation, they're so adroit in their investments that we get above 8% return a year.
Wow.
And on $4 million,
Wow.
that runs into money. So each year...
That's $320,000.
Yeah, so each year we have a good amount of money to put towards various historical projects. Many of them are projects of the foundation. Others, like for example, you'll see 4 books here
Right.
that came out, 4 books in the last 5 months, funded by the foundation and published by the Rhode Island Publication Society. And so the foundation has allowed us to really step up
Sure.
the publication of,
So
of Rhode
you
Island
publish
books.
them and you
Fund them
put
and-
them together?
Yeah, that's right. The foundation does. For example, we just did this book
Fighting
on
Bob
Bob
Quinn. Right.
the great reform governor of Rhode Island back in the 1930s, and he's the man that led the transition of Rhode Island from Republican to Democratic ascendancy. He later became the first chief judge of the U.S. Military Court of Appeals, and this book consists of a number of interviews, lengthy interviews conducted with him by former House Speaker Matt Smith.
Oh, yeah.
Even before he was Speaker,
Right.
back in 1972 and 73, and they were all taped, and the tapes were disintegrating at the Providence College Library. So one of our board members, Russell D. Simone, went and took them and spent literally hundreds of hours reconstructing and transcribing them
Right.
so that they could be published in this book. I edited, went through them in the aftermath, and then wrote a 12,000-word introduction to the book that sets the interviews in context into the 1920s and 1930s,
Right.
and tells all about the political ferment in Rhode Island that took place at that time, most notably the great stink bomb legislature of 1924.
Stink bomb
Yeah,
legislature?
the Democrats were trying to get a constitutional convention. They had the governorship, the lieutenant governorship under Felix Tupin of Woonsocket.
Democrats.
Yeah, but the Republicans
Controlled
controlled
the
the
Senate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because the Senate, each town, regardless of size, had one senator. So in 1920, for example, Providence, with a population of 260,000, had one senator.
only one.
West Greenwich, with a population of 467, had one
one.
senator. So what Quinn was trying to do as the senator from West Warwick, along with Tupin, who was presiding officer, there was a very slight Republican margin because the 1922 elections have been a disaster for the Republicans. And so they filibustered for 42 hours, and hoping that the more elderly Republicans would succumb, have to
Well, they'd
leave
fall
the room,
asleep.
and then they would call the vote for the convention.
Right.
And when it got precarious, some of the Republican leaders hired some thugs from Boston to bring in a bromine gas bomb, and they detonated
Cut
in
it
the
out.
chamber
Cut
underneath
it out.
Felix Tupin's rostrum. Tupin keeled over, the area it cleared out, and then the Republicans went to the Biltmore to devise strategy, and then down the freight elevator and off to Massachusetts, to Rutland, Massachusetts, north of Worcester,
Right.
where they stayed, Sundays accepted. They came back on Sundays because they couldn't be served with summons
Right,
on
on
Sundays.
Sundays.
And they stayed there until the end of the year. The filibuster was in June. They stayed for 6 months in seclusion in Rutland, and of course,
Now, didn't these people have other jobs too, besides being senators?
whatever they did, they did. They sacrificed for the party. And so that was, we talk about
And that's when the Republicans had the power
That's
in Rhode
right.
Island.
And that's why they probably got subsidized by some of the mill owners for the losses they incurred.
Right.
And then the next bizarre thing in the book is, of course, the great racetrack war of 1937, when Quinn, because of corruption out at the racetrack, shut it down. And
Narragansett,
in
there, right
Narragansett,
here, across the
right
street,
where,
right across
where
the
we
street.
sit. And that was a national headline, the Great Racetrack War. And Quinn actually sent National Guard troops there.
I do remember the
and
history
they
of
were,
that.
And they were, they had to, right at the gates to stop the fall session from moving ahead. And it was a battle that caused the Democrats a little bit of a political black eye. So in 1938, when Quinn ran for re-election, he got beat by a Republican upper-class reformer by the name of William Vanderbilt, who was part of the Vanderbilt clan
fortune?
of Newport. But then the Democrats come roaring back in because they had set the stage to be politically dominant, because they had brought over the Franco-Americans and the Italians. They was Republican in 1920.
Right.
By 1940, those two ethnic groups had crossed over
And became
and
Democrats.
became Democrats. Luigi Di Pasquale and Louis Capelli led the movement to bring the Italians over, and Felix Tupin and Albrecht Archambault of West Warwick, both of whom will be inducted into the Hall of Fame this year. They led the Franco-American transition to the Democratic Party. So it's a fascinating episode in Rhode Island political history. Few states have anything to match the turbulence of those two decades.
And how is it that they, back in the day, you said there was only one senator from each city or town? There's 39 cities and towns in Rhode Island, right?
Yeah.
Well, how is it that we ended up having 50 senators?
Well, because there were changes afterwards. There was a constitutional amendment passed in 1928 that allowed
by population.
The Senate to, but very strictly in that Providence got 5 senators.
Right.
And Pawtucket got 2, but it wasn't like one man, one vote. It was a limited concession. And then it wasn't until the mid-1960s when the United States Supreme Court, in the case of Westbury versus Sanders, following up on Reynolds versus Sims, declared the one man, one vote doctrine, and that mandated the reorganization of the General Assembly, but particularly the Senate. So now the Senate, you've got senatorial districts. You had 50. We're down to 38 now.
Yeah.
And those senatorial districts are roughly equal in population.
Right.
And transcend town and city boundaries on occasion as well.
Exactly. They represent double the size of each representative.
Yeah, in essence, yeah. So that's it. So that's Quinn. And then we brought out another book funded by the foundation, and that's Mr. Providence College. You being a great TV star would actually know about him. He's the Fulton Sheen, the Bishop Fulton Sheen of Rhode Island. Back in the 1950s, he used to do television shows right in the same vein as Bishop Sheen, and where he would explain philosophy, education, religion, and things of that type.
At PC.
And he was a prolific writer. He wrote several hundred essays, and we've taken 107 of those and edited them for this particular book. And they deal with a variety of topics from law to politics, philosophy, theology, literature. Because he was a very, very brilliant man. He taught at Providence College for many years, was vice president of community affairs. He was a state senior golf champion.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. He was.
Was he from here originally?
He came from the Elmhurst section of Providence.
Oh.
Went to LaSalle and to PC, and then joined the Dominican Order. We call him Mr. Providence College because he's absolutely the best known Providence College
alumnus
or faculty member, at least
faculty.
Dominican faculty member ever. And I would say the premier Rhode Island Catholic priest of the 20th century.
Really?
And so Mr. Providence College has selected writings of the Reverend Joseph Lennon. So that's another one of our
That's
books.
a popular name in Rhode Island.
Yeah,
too.
Luke, they used to call him Luke because his name was Joseph Luke Lennon. So
Joseph Luke Lennon.
The priest called him Luke and all. Cool hand Luke.
Cool. Father Luke.
Yeah, that's right. Great
go.
writer. And we presented that book up at Providence College a couple of months ago.
Oh, so that's very recent.
Oh yeah, these are all recent. And then this one here is by a fellow that you might know. This is called Democracy in Decline.
Yep.
And this is
I know
me.
that name.
Yeah, yep. And it's a very bulky, makes a good doorstop.
Yep.
And which some people probably would think that's all it's good for. But a group of younger historians wanted this republished, because it went out of print.
Right.
If you look at the back there, that's what one of the historians thought of. The one look up on the top there. What does it say there?
I believe that Democracy in Decline, Rhode Island's Constitutional Development, 1776 to 1841. The finest Rhode Island history book ever written. Wow.
So that's why it was brought out.
Oh, my God.
That's not my words, but that's
I know this person very well.
Yeah, that's right. He's got the Rhode Island website and blog, Christian McVerney.
Yeah.
But so we brought that out. It was published originally in 1977. It went out of print. And Eric Chappett, a young, renowned historian, spearheaded the drive to get it republished. and wrote a nice lengthy introduction
Right.
as to the book's significance. And with that kind of a request, how could the Heritage Harbor Foundation
Not.
deny
Right.
that request and the funding of it, particularly with me as president?
Oh, give me a couple of cliff notes from the book.
Well, basically, it tells the story of Rhode Island from its origins, and we don't ignore the Native Americans and the tremendous work they did in helping to establish Rhode Island back in 1636 through roughly 1644.
And what Native Americans were here?
Well, you had the two principal tribes were the Wampanoags that gave
Right.
shelter to Williams during the winter of 1635-36 when he came
Roger.
to Providence, and then the Narragansetts who deeded him the property for virtually nil.
Right.
As Williams said, it was not purchased by money; it was purchased by love. But you had other tribes. You had the Nipmucks who were in the northwest corner of the state, up in that Burrillville area.
The Nipmucks?
The Nipmuc tribe, the Lake people they were called.
Yeah.
And then you had the Niantics that were down around Charleston and Westerly,
And that's-
just below the Narragansetts.
Right.
And the Manasees who were out on Block Island. So you had a number of
How come
tribes.
there's so many tribes in such a small area?
Well, look at how many there's so many cities and towns, 39 as you mentioned,
Right.
in such a small area. Yeah, that was it. They had so many people, and they wanted
Well, you
hedge
mentioned
boning over a
you
particular
mentioned.
area.
I think you mentioned 6 tribes there.
Yeah.
5 or 6 tribes.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
mentioned.
yeah.
And
Well, the
this-
Wampanoags and the Narragansetts were the largest and the most significant as far as the early years of Rhode Island.
And who was the bad ones?
Well, the Pequots were warlike.
Right.
But they were warlike in some respects in response to the aggressions
Of the
against
settlers.
them of the, particularly by the settlers of Connecticut. Were
Those Connecticut people.
Yeah, the settlements up around Hartford, Windsor, and Wethersfield in 1635 through 1637, and they clashed with the Pequots. And naturally, the Pequots fought back, but there was what they call the Pequot War, which almost annihilated the tribe. And some of them sought refuge with the Niantics, that was sometimes referred to as the Eastern Pequots. And it's complex, but I mean, that book is not about Indians. It's about the constitutional history of the
Right,
state.
right.
Roger Williams, religious liberty, separation of church and state, the Rhode Island Charter, and all the democratic institutions that developed under the charter through the 18th century, and then the fact that the charter's representative provisions and provisions for voting and all were insufficient for the 19th, as Rhode Island became much more industrialized and agricultural, and when the charter became inadequate and those in power, obviously under it, wouldn't change it, then we had a rebellion known as the Dorr Rebellion, and a political rebellion. And,
Yeah, I remember that
yeah,
name. I don't know
yeah.
why, but I remember that.
He's probably the, in my opinion, he and Roger Williams were the greatest Rhode Islanders, and he staged a reform. No deaths or anything.
Was that a Union thing, the Dorr Rebellion?
The Dorr Rebellion. It took place roughly from 1841 to 1843, and only 2 people died. One by a stray shot, and the other of exhaustion. So it wasn't like a bloody rebellion,
Right.
but it was tremendously significant from a political and constitutional point of view, not only for Rhode Island, but as historians are starting to realize, in part because of that book, which is why it was reprinted,
Right.
that it was it was America's most significant democratic uprising.
America's?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, what brought it on? What
Well,
was the cause of
the
it?
refusal of those in power under the
Change,
charter
Yeah.
to realize that the charter, which was great in 1663 and
outdated.
1776, was outdated. You had that malapportionment that we spoke of. There was no constitutional Bill of Rights in Rhode Island. We had a statutory one, but no constitutional Bill of Rights. It was malapportionment, not only of the upper house, but of the lower house as well. And so there were a number of things that made the charter, you might say, anachronistic. And when those in power, and that's typical.
They don't
if you're
wanna
in
change.
power,
Yeah,
you
you don't wanna
Hey,
change. No.
this is perfect. And
Yep.
Dorr and some
Yeah.
of his followers said, no, we have to. He actually was a believer in, there was a political philosophy at that time called the equal rights philosophy. And it was, you might say, significant in several of the northeastern states. And he was a tremendous advocate of equal rights and of the common man, so to speak.
Right, right. So how did he start his rebellion? What did he do?
Well,
There's always something. The
well,
shot,
basically
something.
what he did was to join a group of protesters. He was educated, Harvard educated, and he was a lawyer, studied under Chancellor James Kent, extremely bright guy. So they recruited him, and he became the principal draftsman of the People's Constitution. And the People's Constitution was drafted, and they had a referendum on it, but there was no provision in the charter to change the charter. And so what they did was revolutionary. On their own, they called their own convention, drafted their own constitution, held their own vote, and then tried to put it into effect. That, of course, was regarded by the law and order people, as they call themselves, as treason against the state.
Right.
So they called out the militia to prevent the people's government from going into operation. And, fortunately, there was no pitched battle. The reformers were disbanded. Dorr went into exile briefly. And eventually the law and order people, realizing we got to do something, called a constitutional convention of their own, a second one actually. The first one was a joke. Right. And they called a constitutional convention of their own in late 1842 and drafted basically the present constitution of the state of Rhode Island. That constitution was significantly amended.
So Dorr, in essence, changed the...
Yeah, he changed the state from a charter to the Constitution, and that Constitution was amended many times, and in 1986 it got an overhaul.
Right.
But really the constitutional structure in 2020 is based upon that law and order Constitution of 1843, many times, 44 times amended, and then restructured in 1986.
Wow.
So he's the father of Rhode Island constitutionalism. So, important guy.
Yeah, yeah, and sadly, an important guy that a lot of people don't know about.
Yeah, well, of course, the people, history is written by the victors. Dog and beat. And of course, one of the leading opponents of Thomas Wilson Dorr was the Providence Journal. Back in South Providence, growing up, we used to call it the Protestant Urinal because it was so much,
The Protestant Urinal.
And it was definitely represented the old line position. It was, they were the spokesman for law and order. Their publisher, Henry Bowen Anthony, was rabidly anti-Irish Catholic, and he felt that Dorr's movement was going to allow the Irish Catholic immigrants equality with native Rhode Islanders.
Those lesser citizens, right?
Yeah, and so they blasted Dorr, gave him a very bad reputation. Dorr actually, when he came back to the state, was taken into custody, tried for treason against the state.
Wow.
That was the only time that was done in American history up until that time. And he was jailed for a year, but there was a tremendous national outcry. His liberation became a leading issue in the presidential campaign of 1844. The Democrats nationally, Polk, James Knox Polk, George Dallas, vice president, after whom Dallas is named. And the slogan was Polk, Dallas, and Dorr. And ironically, a lot of the women of Rhode Island, who tended to be a little bit more liberal and in some instances educated, formed an organization to free Dorr. And that organization, I always call that Rhode Island's the Woman's Coming Out Party. That was the first time that women assembled publicly on a political issue. Wow. And some of those women went on to become leaders of the suffrage movement.
And what year was that?
1840.
So that was, I was going to say that. That was before the suffrage. That was before the suffrage.
That's right. We were in the vanguard of the women's suffrage movement, and in large measure because of women's reaction to the imprisonment of Thomas Dorr.
Dorr. Yeah. And they got him out after a year.
He was released from prison in June of 1845, but the stay in prison was where, the Providence Place Mall is located now, and it was very terrible conditions, and Dorr was never a strong man physically, and the stay in prison broke his health.
Right.
He was never well after that, and he died in December of 1854 at the age of 49.
Wow.
So he certainly made an impact for
For a
an
young,
individual,
you're a young guy.
for a young
yeah,
whippersnapper.
Yeah, young whippersnapper. That's very interesting
Yeah.
stuff. It really is.
So all that tells about, about everything from Williams through Dorr and to Dorr's death, and then it stopped. So we did bring that out. And then the last one, talk about a monster book. We brought out the Proceedings of the Rhode Island Council of War.
Yep.
These were buried away in the archives. Even historians didn't use them or unaware of them. And then there was an individual from, that down in Texas now, ironically, his name is John Robertson,
Right.
a PhD, a doctorate, and he took all of those records and edited them with commentary. It's a massive book, and it really tells the story of Rhode Island's strategy during the American Revolutionary War. And it was never, the fact that this was never published before is astounding. And we just brought this out.
Now, was he from Rhode Island initially?
No, just he was a military historian.
Oh.
A guy that just was enamored of the history of American military history, particularly in the Revolutionary era. And it was astounding. You look at the size of the book and how much material is in there. You see, the legislature ran the war effort because under the charter, and this was another thing Dorr protested against, that the governor had virtually no power. He was a figurehead.
Right.
He
Well,
had
he's still
power.
a figurehead in this state.
Well, no, it's a change. There's been a change with the Separation of Powers Amendments in 2004. Although the governors, for some reason, haven't made sufficient use of the powers that have been bestowed upon them.
Right.
But back then, the legislature ran the show. So this Council of War was a General Assembly, a legislative council, with others invited in who were prominent, that devised Rhode Island's war strategy, basically from 1775 down to the end of the American Revolution. So it's for a Revolutionary War, this is not a book. Some of these other books you could buy, ripublications.org.
Right.
But this
Not
book,
that one?
this book is a research book. So historians of the American Revolution and a lot of militia people who are like the Patuxent Rangers that are
Right.
closely allied with us, the Bristol Train of Artillery, the Newport Artillery. Those individuals would read this stuff and enjoy it, but this wouldn't be something that the average reader would. The only thing they might take it up would be for bedtime reading because they'd fall asleep
Well,
after
what do
the
you
first
got?
4
The Kurdish
pages.
Guard down there in East Greenwich too.
Yeah, well, the Kentish Guards too. Yeah.
And
What
you
is
know,
it?
you know, it gets me that I lived in East Greenwich for a time, and I noticed there was a plaque in front of City Hall down there, and it says this is the home of, or the original site of the start of the U.S. Navy was conceived at that site or on that site in East Greenwich.
Well, I have an article on the origins of the U.S. Navy that's going to be in a forthcoming book where I discuss much of that. It's called Rhode Island's Contributions to the Development of the United States. And it's a 36-page booklet. It's an outgrowth of a talk that Speaker Nicholas Mattiello asked me to give to the speakers of the House of the various American states who came here in September for a conference. He was the president, the conference
Speakers of the House
president.
nationwide?
Nationwide. And so he asked me, he said, please let them know that Rhode Island is not just a pretty place. Tell us what importance Rhode Island had.
Right.
And so I oriented my speech towards that and then elaborated upon my talk, and it's going to be published as a booklet and distributed to all the libraries and schools and everything else, because it places Rhode Island in an incredibly favorable light.
Well, I do know that Rhode Island was the first state of the 13 original colonies to declare its independence.
Well, not quite. That's the point. No, that's what it's called. They have Rhode Island Independence Day on May 4th.
Right.
Actually, what we did that day, and it doesn't sound too glamorous, we renounced allegiance to the king.
Right.
But we didn't renounce the empire. We still, in the documents from May 4th onward through the middle of July, we still called ourselves the English colony.
Right.
We just got fed up with the king and renounced allegiance. That was a very bold thing to do. More bold than anybody else had done to that point.
Right.
But it wasn't a Declaration of Independence. But,
Oh.
you know, who's going to argue that? We have Rhode Island Independence Day, and I'm not going around as a purist. What we did was tremendously important, but we didn't really declare independence till we ratified the Declaration on July the 19th
Right.
of that year. But Renunciation of Allegiance Day is not, that's not jazzy. It's not pithy like Cleo's Trio. So
Cleo's
we'll
Trio, yeah.
we call it Rhode Island. I've got no problems with calling it Rhode Island Independence Day. I'm not, you know, sometimes you get some of these professors that are very foppish and purist, and well, of course that's not Independence Day. Just look at the documents in June. It's the English colony. But we don't do that. It's
Really?
Rhode Island Independence Day. That's good enough.
Well, the Bostonians take credit for because of the
Boston Tea Party. And that was just
But
vandalism.
wasn't that like 8 months after the Gaspee?
It was 18 months after the Gaspee.
18, was it 18 months?
18 months. June, from June 9th to mid-December of the next year of 1773. And that's a bunch of guys getting drunk, dressing up like Indians, and throwing some tea into the harbor.
Yeah.
It was like a tea party gone wild.
Yeah, like you said,
it was a tea
that
party.
was vandalism. Whereas what the
Gaspee, we went down from boat from Bristol and 8
Yeah.
from Providence, fired on a vessel of the Royal Navy,
Right.
wounded the commander, Lieutenant Duddingston, took the crew prisoner,
Right.
off the ship,
Burnt the ship to the ground for the waterline.
That was absolutely the boldest action taken
Ever.
by any, and that kind of in my essay that I'm presenting, where we talk about Rhode Island independence, that Gaspee was not only significant here, but it's sometimes called by the people down in Patuxent there, Dave Stackhouse, when he was starting Gaspee days back in the 1960s. I was just a little young greenhorn professor, and he called me in, and because he wanted to call it First Blow for Freedom.
Right.
But he didn't want to be hyperbolic and you know, go way out there over his skis. So he sat down with me and we talked, and back and forth, and I basically told him then, I said, clearly, First Blow for Freedom is not overstatement. And the more time has passed, and the more historians have studied the events from mid-1772 onward to the outbreak of the American Revolution, the more that stands as valid.
Yeah, of
and
course
we're
it
going to
does.
be celebrating, by the way, the 250th in 2022. Already the Patuxent Rangers and the Gaspee Days Committee are already very, very much at work in attempting to celebrate that. And I have a fellow from Johns Hopkins, professor, that called me with connections to PBS, and they want to do a PBS special on the
Really?
Gaspee. I'm supposed to meet with him next week and go over some of the details with him. And there's a fellow on our Heritage Harbor board by the name of Ken Dooley, who wrote a play that got John Gordon, the Irish immigrant that was executed, got a pardon for him, and he's working on that Gaspee event as well, doing a play.
Yep.
So it's going to be a pretty big deal in 2022. Nellie Gorbea, the Secretary of State, likewise introducing a resolution for the 250th celebration, and kicking off Rhode Island's part of it will be the commemoration of the Gaspee.
Because that kind of takes away from the Boston thing.
Oh, as well it should. I mean, there's an example, the media.
Right.
Oh,
Well, they had a bigger
historical
media. They have a big media.
Absolutely. And so they stole the show.
Right.
And even the Boston Massacre before, well, look at that was a snowball fight that got out of hand.
Really?
With some very jumpy British soldiers. Probably one of them got hit in the eye with a rock and shot into the crowd. And so you have some death, very unfortunate. But it was a riot, a spontaneous, unplanned riot.
Right.
That almost like what you would call Kent State, only to even lesser degree.
Right.
And of course, they take the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party and put themselves in the vanguard of the revolution, and neither one of those come even close to compare with the Gaspee.
Right, yeah. I mean, I read that thing a long, long time ago,
Yeah.
and I said, "Whoa, what? This is more of an event than
That's
throwing
right.
tea over the
Yeah,
side
that's
of a
something we'd be
boat."
downtown, get liquored up, and go over to across from Capriccio's and jump out of a ship and start throwing stuff off it. Big deal.
Right.
And the next day you wake up and what do we do?
And it's all brown water.
That's right.
from
exactly.
the tea, from the tea bags.
Yeah.
And didn't they actually lure the British ship into the shallow water? And didn't the ship get beached?
Yeah, that was they were the Hannah. They were chasing the Hannah, and of course they knew there was shallow water off Namquid Point, and so
There was a sandbar over there.
it was a a shallow draft vessel, and of course the Gaspee followed the vessel, had a deeper draft and ran aground.
Right.
And so they were able, because it ran aground the early afternoon, the Hannah got in, told the Providence people, John Brown, who takes a hit because of his support for the slave trade, but
Right.
was a tremendous factor in Rhode Island's revolutionary movement.
Right.
He and his principal captain, Abraham Whipple, got together 8 longboats, and somebody rode by horse down to Bristol and got a wild man, Simeon Potter, the father
wild
of DeWolf.
man?
Well, yeah, he was a ferocious guy, and he got on a ship there in Bristol, a boat, and rowed up as well. And so Bristol hasn't taken much advantage of the Gaspee, but they were through Simeon Potter. They were very much involved. I've tried to tell the Bristol 4th of July Committee, reach across the bay and hook up with Gaspee Days by 2022, because Bristol had a role in that Gaspee as well.
Wow.
But no one listens to me.
No
So
one
it'll never
listens to
happen.
you? Now, what happened? You still have that property down on Allen's Avenue? Oh no! Did I hit a sour
Raw
note?
nerve. My wife and I tried to develop that Providence waterfront.
That was a great spot.
You know, when you took your boat onto our dock, the Dock Conley down there
Yeah.
and all. Here's a story on that very, very briefly.
We went down to Newport from there.
Yeah.
We went all over the harbor, remember?
That's right.
We did a Bob's Big
the
Adventure.
ferry went out. We had 27 cruise ship visits for 5 successive years with American Cruise Lines. But what happened is the Providence Department of Planning said we've got to develop the Providence waterfront from the foot of Thurber's Avenue down to the Hurricane Barrier, all along it. There's about 67 acres to the east of Allen's Avenue. And so, knowing of this, we had just acquired a building through the tax sale process,
Right.
Gail and I, the old Dunlap Tire building.
Tire company.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so we said, well, Jesus, if the city is going to do this, let's be the pioneers.
Right.
And so we jumped in, rehabbed the building, spent almost $7 million to put it on the National Register, bought the tank farm next to it
Right.
that belonged to Cargill, demolished all the tanks, built out the dock, brought in the cruise ships, and we were all set to go. Look, that was going to be the start of a waterfront development that would bring in $18 million worth of tax revenue to the city of Providence and create numerous jobs.
And tell me why.
And here's what happened. Here's why.
They put salt or something on the land.
Oh, wait till you hear this. So the Providence Redevelopment Agency approves it 9-0. City Plan Commission 6-1. I don't know where that one guy was coming from. It goes to the City Council, to the Ordinance Committee, okay?
This is after it's approved by...
This is all those other approvals, but you had to change the zoning because the existing zoning was marine industrial, which meant scrap yards were allowed if the scrap was imported. And the city wanted it changed to ban scrap. But it went in, it was a fellow by the name of Michael Solomon, who was the chairman, and
Right.
Seth Yurden, who was the vice chairman. And they were bribed. Clear and simple,
Really?
on television. Bribed. Prove me wrong.
Right.
They blocked the zoning. In the meantime, ProMet Shipyard was able, blundered by the state, by DEM, to buy the shipyard from the state. Here's going to be a centerpiece of that waterfront
'Cause it
development.
is in the
and
center.
the state gives it away, and nobody could bid because they had a lease with the state for $70,000 a year. so nobody could bid. So they come in and they buy it from the state for $1,138,000. They bribe these two guys to block the zoning because they're negotiating with Sims Metal.
Right.
By blocking the zoning and keeping it open to scrap, what they do was spin it to Sims in the midst of the Great Recession for $12,608,000.
Wow.
Public land, your land and my land,
Right.
bought for, shouldn't have been sold to start with, but bought for $1,138,000
yeah.
and spun
For
by
12.
blocking the zoning for $12,608,000. When Sims came down there, that doomed the waterfront project.
Oh, sure, you
it
got scrap
eventually-
metal next to-
and it eventually doomed our project, and so we went down the tubes. So that's what happened. That's what happened with the Providence waterfront, and nobody cares. I went to the U.S. Attorney. Now he's the Attorney General, Norona, blind eye, nothing. I went to the U.S. Attorney, the Attorney General of Rhode Island, nothing. I went to the FBI. They didn't see anything wrong with state land bought for $1,138,000, spun the next year because the zoning had been blocked for $12,608,000. Now, if Cianci had been mayor, the FBI would have been bringing in agents from the Rocky Mountains eastward to investigate that. But all of these people, public officials, blew it off. And so what do we got down there now? We've got mountains of salt, scrapyards galore, the water polluted by the runoff, the opportunity for Providence to have a wonderful waterfront.
And you can see it right at the Thurvis Avenue. If you're driving down Thurvis Avenue, you look out there, that's what you're seeing. That's the property he's talking about.
Yeah,
folks.
right next to the interstate and everything else. And of course that had a special interest to me. It was a legacy thing because I grew up in South Providence, and my people worked down on that waterfront. There's stevedores and things of that type. My family, and it was a crushing blow to me and my wife. We're going to do a book on it. And a lot of what I told you will be in that book.
Yep.
And we've got all kinds of photos of the good days and the Fable Line Club and the cruise ships.
Oh, yeah, that
and
club
the festivals.
upstairs. Yeah, that was nice.
Yeah.
That was nice. I've been there several times.
Absolutely pathetic what happened. But the thing is, there's no outrage in Rhode Island. You wonder why Rhode Island can, has such, a level of public corruption. It's because the people don't care.
Right.
They read it,
The
and
apathy,
they don't do anything about
the apathy
it.
is unbelievable.
Yeah, there's absolute apathy. So things like that happen, and nobody raised a finger. And not your law enforcement personnel, nothing. And then I went into federal court to sue Sims for the damage they did to my building by putting hundreds of tons of scrap next to it.
Right.
I filed an action in federal court. I had to wait 6 years for a trial and then got pressured into a settlement whereby I lost the building. All that'll be in there as well. This is an expose, but people will say, gee, that was a shame. Wow, that can't even be true. And then they'll go on with their life.
Right, yeah. Well, it was sad to see. It was sad because I saw it. I mean, I was down there many times.
You went out on our boat there. I had a boat, I called it the Senile.
Yeah.
Because already I was so old I couldn't drive it well. We went out and toured the harbor. We did one of your shows out there.
That's
on
right.
the Senile.
Because it made no sense to me. You have this beautiful building there, the club upstairs. You had the boat out there, and then right next to it, you got this pile of whatever it was.
Scrap metal.
Scrap
There it
metal.
is.
And they also had salt or something down
Look
there,
on the
too.
other side now. They have a mountain of salt 50 feet high.
Yeah.
And to give you an example,
Covered with the black top, right?
Yep. Now here's the other example here. This is your public. This is why there's so much corruption. There's a Lady Bird Johnson, Highway Beautification Act, 1965-66.
Right.
1,000 feet of an interstate, you can't have a scrapyard or you can't have salt piles unless they're covered from public view. These things are almost on the interstate. We complain to the federal government, to the Federal Highway Administration, to the State Department of Transportation. Nothing. They refuse to enforce the law.
What about coastal resources?
We apply to them because
Or the DEM?
well, there was toxic materials running off those piles into the river in violation of the Clean Water Act.
Right.
I paid $65,000 for chemical tests showing there were pollutants going off the scrap pile of lead, zinc, copper, and cadmium, and other particles, and they were being carried towards the hospital campus by prevailing southerly winds. And I made that presentation to the EPA and to DEM, and nobody did anything about anything. Pathetic.
Wow.
Pathetic.
Wow.
So, in other words, that scrap company came in there like the 500-pound gorilla, and no one dared to do a thing. And so you got violations of the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Federal Highway Act, you name it, and yet it continues to exist.
They had some real connections, those people.
Scarol, as the Italians would say.
Italian, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. That's exactly what they would say.
And that's the sad thing. So, I mean, the city and the state were hurt tremendously by that level of corruption. You could have had a magnificent waterfront.
You could put a casino right there. You could have had anything right there.
You had a 40-foot channel right off my dock.
Right.
You could have. We had envisioned
cruise ships.
bringing cruise ships in.
Yep.
You couldn't bring the massive ones in, but
Right.
you could bring in very sizable cruise ships. And what would they have done? You let them off, and they go into Providence and
Spend money.
buy souvenirs.
Spend money.
Yeah, and we've got Roger Williams Park and the RISD Museum and historic sites and everything else. It would have been a
Brown
tremendous
University,
incentive.
they could have been all over the place
Exactly.
from there.
Exactly.
They could have almost walked to the Providence Place Mall from there.
Yep. Or taken by bus up to Slater Mill
Right.
or some of the other historic sites, or even beyond the boundaries of Rhode Island. You know, on those cruise ships, you have these bus trips that,
Right.
45 minutes, an hour long. Would have been great for the whole region.
Yeah.
And unbelievable.
But a scrapyard prevailed.
Well, let's
Better
face
to
it,
have a scrapyard and a
never
salt pile, and a salt pile.
And never came out. The rezoning provision died right in that ordinance committee.
Now, how is it that only 2 people had to say when the zoning and the ordinance approved it?
That's what we wanted the FBI to investigate. Unfortunately, I wasn't on the ordinance committee or privy.
No, but how many members on the Providence?
Well, the chairman and the vice chairman control the
that's
operation,
right.
basically.
Okay, yeah.
And so that was it. Who knows the internal machinations? But when but the people that owned Promet they were, my action.
Promet?
Promet was the shipyard next to my building there.
Okay.
Yeah, and they were already in negotiations with Sims when that rezoning ordinance went before the council.
Oh.
So, Sims, look at what they paid, $12,608,000.
Wow.
So they made $11.5 million. So I would think,
Now, wait a minute,
they
who
paid a
made
little
the
to get it.
$11 million?
Sims. They
flipped it.
Promet bought it for $1,138,000 and flipped it to Sims for $12,608,000. So Promet got the $11.5 million profit.
$11 million.
Yeah.
11
And I've said this in the paper. I've even written in the Providence Journal with those figures, and it creates nothing other than maybe, wow, look at this, and then, hey, where are we going to dinner tonight? No, they don't care.
Sad.
Yeah.
Sad but true.
My wife and I, we lost $5.3 million on the deal as well. I'm working now at 82, still bailing out because a lot of the money that I borrowed was from private investors who were my friends and who trusted me.
Right.
So I'm still, I've got them almost paid off, and that's after 8 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
That's sad. That's actually sad.
So we go from the realm of history
Yep.
to the realm of current events.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I know what that's like. You're dealing with a city or a town and corruption, because I had it on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
It was Jack White said it was the second biggest story he ever did. My event in Woonsocket. I owned a house in Woonsocket back in the late 80s.
Yeah.
And my house was robbed. And my house was robbed by a friend of the chief of police and the mayor, or the son of a friend.
Yeah.
The chief of police, the mayor, the judge, they had every combination going.
Yeah.
And they they actually
Squashed it.
called me.
Yeah.
The town guy, not the chief of police, the
Solicitor?
safety director,
Oh, safety director.
called me 4 days after the robbery, and he said, if you know what's good for you, just forget the robbery happened. I said, are you kidding me? He said, you don't know who you're dealing with. I go, nobody. You don't know who you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And I called Jack White. And Jack White was on Channel 12 3 consecutive days they ran it. They called it Friends in High Places.
Yeah.
The chief of police got fired. The safety director, I don't know if he resigned or got fired. The mayor didn't run for re-election. It caused it so much of, but I still lost everything. I lost
Yeah, yeah.
38, they cleaned me out.
Yeah.
The kid cleaned me out. And then when he went to trial, the case got thrown out. He got acquitted because they lost the file. They lost all the evidence.
Yeah,
Gee,
wow.
that was just weird, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
Things happen.
Jack White was good. He's in the Hall of Fame. We inducted him about 10, 12 years ago for all the work that he did with his investigative
Right,
reporting, and
right.
which was a great contribution to Rhode Island. Try to keep it honest,
Try.
even if you don't succeed.
As little as
Yeah.
the state is, you
Yeah.
would think that it'd be easy to keep in line.
Yeah.
But it's not for some reason.
No, no. And it's a shame, because I'm so proud of the state with its history.
Right. Yes,
and
exactly.
try to do something, my wife and I, to improve the state with that development, and with a number of other things that we've done in South Providence
Right.
with real estate. And
It's got to
you
be
know,
heartbreaking
yeah,
to
yeah.
think of all you could have done there,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
all could have just snowballed
Yeah, yeah.
into a whole bunch of great things in downtown Providence. Instead of seeing
Yeah.
a scrap heap
Yeah,
when you're
yeah,
on
big salt piles, yeah.
when you're on the
Yeah.
Service Avenue curve over
yeah,
there.
yeah.
That's what you're looking at.
I'm reminded of John Greenleaf Whittier's a poem there of all the sad words of pen or tongue, or tongue or pen rather, the saddest these it might have been.
It might have been.
So that'll be the theme of our book on the Providence waterfront. But we've got beautiful photos of the glory days, but also a lot of the negative stuff that I've just cited to you that I don't want it to be forgotten.
Right, right. Well, I didn't want it to be forgotten. That's why I brought
Yeah,
it up,
yeah,
because
yeah.
it was terrible to see how that went down. I
Yeah,
didn't know
yeah.
all the story, but I did know some of it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I know how you got
Nailed.
shortchanged.
Yeah, shortchanged.
Shortchanged or something.
5.3 million worth of
Yeah, I didn't know what kind of money it was, but I knew it was a lot of money.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And how you tried so hard to turn that into something, and you never
Yeah.
got your due.
Yeah. Well, we came here, through up the East Bay and through East Providence to here. My wife doesn't even like to drive into Providence anymore.
No?
No.
I kind of don't blame her,
Yeah,
especially
yeah,
even now.
Yeah,
My
yeah,
God.
yeah.
Now it's a sanctuary city.
Yeah, unbelievable. Huh? Yeah.
That in itself is
Yeah. Clear violation
something.
of federal law, but who
Who
enforces
cares about
federal
federal law?
Yeah,
Who
that's-
cares about the feds?
Yeah, yeah.
I always thought, I grew up, I was going to be a constitutional lawyer. I always thought the federal law supersedes state and local law,
Yeah, yeah.
but apparently not.
No.
In this circumstance,
No, not in today's climate.
it doesn't
It's a
make
shame.
doesn't make
Yeah.
any difference
Yeah.
for some people,
Yeah.
and they get away with it for some unknown reason.
Yeah. Well, look at federal law. Look at what Sims, Federal Highway Act, Clean Water Act,
Right.
Clean Air Act,
Yep.
all immaterial. Nobody wanted to enforce them.
And you
The
hit
laws are on the book. Violate them with impunity.
Well, I had dealt with the coastal management when I was selling real estate years
Yeah.
ago, and I can't believe that Coastal Resources or the DEM didn't get involved in that, because they are sticklers. They
Yeah,
were
yeah.
hard-nosed. When I had a piece of property that was available and
Yeah.
could have been worth a couple $1 million to me, but because they saw what somebody had left, the kids had went over to the property. It had a garage on the property.
Yeah.
It was down in Warwick Neck. And kids had gone over there and turned the outside faucet on, and it was on for months.
Yeah.
And then the DEM goes, or Coastal Resources goes down, oh no, this is a swamp area. You can't build on this.
Yeah.
I said, that's not swampy
Yeah,
because of any other reason other than it was waterlogged for
Yeah.
3 months.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to hear it.
Yeah.
Didn't want to hear it. Couldn't. They deemed the land unused, unbuildable.
Well, it all depends on who's complaining, whose ox is being good, I guess,
Right. Yeah. Or who's paying
Yeah.
something.
I've had good relationships with Coastal Resources, but not with DEM.
No.
No. I've written very critical essays about them. I won a major case against them about a Supreme Court decision about 2 years ago against DEM. I have a very low regard for that operation there.
Right. I see that some people like them, some people very much dislike them.
Yeah, I'm one of the latter.
One of the latter. Yeah. So what do you got going now? What's your next project?
Well, the next project, from a historical point of view, is the induction on May the 2nd at the Crown Plaza
Right.
of 8 individuals into the Rhode Island Heritage Hall of
Hall of
Fame.
Fame.
Each May we have an induction ceremony, and we
Yeah,
put
you
in
had, this
individuals.
is last year's, right? This
Yeah,
is last
that's
year's
last year's program.
Right.
And that was the 55th, and this year will be the 56th, and we've got some very significant people going in. John Murphy, the founder of Home Loan and Investment, and an individual who's a major benefactor of, say, Providence College and a number of other institutions.
Right.
He's used his wealth, spread it around for humanitarian purposes. We got Jim Leach, the CEO of public television, the president of the board there, and
Right.
another humanitarian. We have Robert Burke, who did the Independence Trail,
Yeah.
runs Potter Pure and has done the Independence Trail in Providence. We have Bill McCormick, William McCormick of McCormick and Schmick's.
Oh, yeah.
He grew up in Mount Pleasant, and now there's about 70 of those restaurants. He's was the
McCormick and Schmidt.
former ambassador to New Zealand. Just raised $24 million for the Portland, Oregon Opera. Every Veterans Day, his restaurants give free meals to
Yeah.
any veterans that come in. He's a big humanitarian and,
Sure.
and still, greatly appreciates Rhode Island. We have Bill Reynolds, Journal Bulletin
Right.
sports
Sure,
writer.
sports writer, yeah.
Yeah, so we have quite a group going in.
Yep.
And hopefully it'll be well attended. And
And that's when? May what?
that's May 2nd.
Where?
And that's going to be the Crown Plaza Hotel.
In Warwick?
In Warwick. And the big news also is that I was able to get the Bristol State House on Bristol
Right.
Common.
Yeah.
That building is now going to be the
Is that that white building with the columns? Is that?
well, it doesn't have columns, but it's a 1860 building with a tall cupola.
Oh, yeah,
And that's going to be the Museum of the Rhode Island Heritage Hall of Fame.
Oh, good.
Where we'll tell Rhode Island history through the medium of biography. As we're entering into an agreement with the Bristol State House Foundation that owns the building. It's the only one of the 5 early state houses not in public hands.
Right.
And the foundation owns it, and we're going into final negotiations with the foundation, actually which I created in 1994, and got the building transferred. And hopefully after July 1st, we'll start that museum going.
Well, you're an interesting guy, I'll tell you that. And I'm glad I could get you to come here and join me and spend an hour with Bob. It's been a while.
Oh, it
since
has
the
been
last
indeed.
time you
Yep.
were here,
Yep.
right?
Absolutely, yeah. Tempest fugit, as they say.
Yeah, there
Time
you go.
flies when you're having fun.
Well, thanks for stopping by.
Okay, my pleasure. My pleasure, Bob.
And folks, thank you for watching An Hour with Bob. And until next time.